Good afternoon, Poe fans. Welcome back to Poe Discussions with Carmen and Jeanie. Hey, Jeanie, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. And yourself, Carmen?
I'm doing very well. It's a great afternoon. I just got back from my trip yesterday all over. We went through 7 states and saw some Poe things. So I am charged up, ready to Poe today.
Woohoo! Yes, I've managed to stay inside out of this, hell heat, and that's my traveling right now. So
Absolutely. Well, we have a very special guest today, and his name is James McKenna. Welcome, James. And if you will tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised in New York City. And, back at a time when New York City was different. It was old New York City, back in the 40s.
Okay.
Right. So I've been around a while. Recently, I had written a book. But prior to that, going back a little bit, I came from an era where reading was stressed. Reading was, was top on everybody's list when in school. And I loved vocabulary. I used to walk around with a small dictionary in my back pocket when I was a kid.
Oh, very cool.
Well, it was an era that, the subway, for example, was only a nickel. Telephone calls. You go to a telephone booth, and to make a telephone call, it was a nickel. It didn't move up to a dime till the early 1950s, around 1951, I think.
Okay.
Right. So at that time, I was an avid reader, but mostly nonfiction.
Okay.
Mostly nonfiction. But in school, they stressed fiction.
Mm-hmm.
English classes.
Yes.
And so there I was reading fiction as well. And today, here I am in Minnesota.
Okay.
And happily married to the best woman in the world. And
awesome.
Because of her, I wrote the book.
Oh, that is amazing. That is awesome.
Well, how did you end up in Minnesota from New York, though? I mean,
we met through mutual friends.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we hit it off, and here I am in Minnesota.
Nice.
Yes.
And I like Minnesota.
I have visited there once, and it is absolutely beautiful. Absolutely loved it.
I guess the weather wasn't that much different, was it, from New York to Minnesota? A little less busier maybe, but the weather kind of the same, I guess.
Well, Minnesota is wide open, compared to New York City.
Oh, yes.
I mean, you have grasslands, and you have a lot of farms out here. And didn't have very much in New York City, in terms of farms. We had Central Park, a few other parks, but that was it.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're talking about, I got to interrupt just a second, because I immediately started thinking of the Newsies when you were talking about everything being reading and about the newspapers and everything being a nickel, and I got this vision of all the newspaper boys on the streets and the newspaper caps. And I was just wondering, were you one of the newspaper boys? Were you a newsie?
No, I didn't sell newspapers, but they were all about, just about every corner. You found the boys selling newspapers.
Yeah.
Newspapers, some of them don't even exist anymore.
Oh, I know. It's a kind of a lost art, really.
We had the Daily News. We had the New York Times. We had the Herald Tribune. That's not here anymore. Doesn't exist anymore.
That's right.
Same thing with the Mirror, the Daily Mirror. That's gone too. That's the nature of the place.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to mention, I'm a current teacher, and Jeanie is a retired teacher, and she's taught I call it the big four, all four of, English, math, science, social studies. I've taught social studies and English, currently teaching high school English. And you mentioned that in school, fiction was what was stressed rather than nonfiction. And I think, Jeanie, wouldn't you say that that's kind of what we were like encouraged to read too during our era? But
yeah, and the thing about it is that the encouragement also depended upon the subject.
True.
The subject matter. In the English world, it was always pushed with the fiction because you had the philosophical studies of the Brave New World, Then you also had the iconic Shakespeare with the iambic pentameter, and those types of things. But then on the other spectrum, then you had social studies where you were pushed toward nonfiction because you were encouraged to read things like the Mayflower Compact, the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, and all of those. So it was very much a blending, and sometimes I think they encourage the English to do the fiction to try to get away from the fiction.
Yeah, I would agree. And then now, for probably the past, I'd say 10 to 15 years, it's been more of a balance of fiction and nonfiction. To make sure that, because so many kids do not read traditionally like we did growing up. And so they want kids to have both of those things. So it has changed vastly over the years, the way it's taught.
And just like James was saying how vocabulary is a very big thing and carrying around the dictionary. And I think that's part of the reason why we're trying to push, well, at least the school system is trying to push the nonfiction back into place.
Yes.
Is because the vocabulary has gotten so slang that a lot of people can't interpret it or read it or contextualize it. Because I know when I was teaching the Mayflower Compacts, they have these Lexile reading levels now to where they put that the Mayflower Compact, even though it's not even 200 words long, is at a 13th grade level, basically freshman college level reading. These children can't, some college levels can't even read at a college level. I hate to say it, but it is. And that's the one thing about it I would like to say, James, your book, it very much is a push on the vocabulary. I can see the influence of Poe in your writing in that book, especially with the vocabulary. And I was very excited about it because I said, there's words that I have not seen on a book in a long time, and I'm loving it.
In modern books, absolutely.
Yes, in modern times. So that's one thing I was very excited for with your book when I was reading it. Is it definitely reaches that level of the early 1800s when people put so much influence on the actual verbiage of what they were writing. Yeah. So
I felt like Poe was like standing right behind you, like right on your shoulder as you were writing, because that influence came through beautifully in your writing. Really enjoyed it. So I know there are some things you don't want to give away about An October's Journey, but tell us a little bit so our listeners and our viewers will be able to kind of grasp a little, like they can read about it, but we just wanted to hear from you a little bit about the book.
A little summary.
Yeah.
Well, it's the professionals call it literary fiction, right? Versus genre fiction. Genre fiction, they care about the storyline more than they care about how it's written. So they say that genre fiction sells a lot of books. But literary fiction these days, they earn the awards and sell less books because of how it's written, the vocabulary used. And so writing literary fiction, you not only have to take care of the storyline, make sure that the storyline is coherent, but you have to, paint. Like an artist paints with oils and watercolors. An author has to paint with words. And so the storyline, I wrote the story in first person, first of all, because I wanted the reader and my main character to connect. But every time my main character had a thought, it would be like my main character was telling the reader, this is what I'm thinking. So you get to know me. Right? So when the action starts later on, you'll know where I'm coming from. So in literary fiction, especially if you're writing 19th century, I should tell you this before I give you some of the storyline.
Okay.
My wife had a book, not written, she hands me a book. She says, take a look at this. And I started to read the first few pages, and it was a book that was written about, well, the storyline took place in the 19th century. As I was reading, there was something wrong with how it was written. It was written as if the author was a 21st century author writing about something that took place in the 19th century. And once I got past the fourth page, I had to stop. I had to stop because to me it seemed like it was written for an elementary school reader. It wasn't written for a mature reader, and it was non sequitur. It didn't fit. So I mentioned that to my wife, and she says, "Well, how about you writing a book then?" And I said, "Wait a minute. I'm just talking about how I can't get into the book written by this other person. And the other person's famous. In fact, movies were made from, I won't mention the name."
Oh, and that's fine. That's totally okay.
Movies made from several of the person's books. And she kept goading me because, in a good way.
Yeah.
So I said, all right, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll write you an example of what I mean about a 19th century novel and how I think it should be written. So we agreed. I said, but one more thing, and this is important. We have to buy a new computer.
That's a deal.
I said, if you buy a new computer, I'll write you a book. All right. So she bought the new computer. Now I was locked in. What could I do?
Yep.
So I made the promise that I fulfilled the promise. So I told her, okay, I'll write the book. The problem was that I was writing a 19th century novel, but I had to feel like I was in the 19th century writing a novel. I didn't want to be a 21st century writer writing a 19th century book. So I didn't get started for 2 weeks because I had to think about it.
Yeah.
And I had to put myself really in the 19th century when I, sat in front of the computer, the new computer. So I started to write after 2 weeks. And in the 19th century novel, there's character development early in the book. So they spend time developing the central character, and they pay attention to the times and the culture that central character is in. If he comes from a wealthy family, a well-educated family, it's got to be brought to the fore. The reader's got to be aware of that. However, all the characters fit with each other. Now, having said that, Edgar Allan Poe is a character in the book.
Yes, I loved that.
But I wanted to show a different side of Poe. No one person is all this or all that. We're all composites. And I saw Poe a little differently than most people, and I'll explain that later on. But in the book, I wanted to show a lighter side of Poe, and I wanted to show the more human side of Poe. So I made him the central character. Now, storyline. On the occasion of the main character's 22nd birthday, there's a party at the wealthy, well, he's very wealthy, and there was a party at his home. And one of the invitees was Edgar Allan Poe. And that evening, Edgar Allan Poe gives my central character, Jonathan Brant, a very special gift. And this gift involved the central character having to embark on a journey, a one-of-a-kind journey. Edgar Allan Poe needed an attorney, and Jonathan Brant was a young 22-year-old attorney. And he needed him for a special trial that was to take place in an old Puritan town. And I'll just say this, it was a witchcraft trial. Right? And central character, Jonathan, thought this was some kind of play that Poe had arranged, that it wasn't real, it was all staged, and he accepts it. And then the journey begins. All right. Now I've got to say this. When we look at the 19th century novel, let's say Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre, right? A lot of people think of Jane Eyre as a romance.
Yeah.
Right? Rochester, Jane Eyre and Rochester. The thing is that she doesn't meet Rochester until chapter 12. So you have all that buildup before she even meets the man she falls in love with.
Yeah.
That's 19th century, right? So I had to make the reader comfortable with, give them the feel of the 19th century and how society was, how everything was orchestrated so that they would have the feel of being there and not just, reading about a story that takes place in the 19th century. I'll say this. It's a one-of-a-kind adventure. It's not, nothing about it is common, where all you do is change the names of the characters and change the places, and it's still the same old storyline. No, this is something new. I didn't want to give them anything that was already manufactured by other authors.
Yeah.
Then there's this. I fill the book with surprises, especially at the end. Because the end is very, very important. Books have got to have an ending because that's the nature of the mind. And the mind needs, it needs fulfillment. In other words, if I were to say to you, dan, 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 dan,
Dun, dun.
all right, but you had to finish it, right? You had to finish it because it needs resolution.
Right.
So anybody who's thinking about a movie, or somebody brings up a movie and starts talking about the actors and actresses in the movie, and you can't remember the name of a particular actor, it will drive you crazy.
Yes.
Right? You start going through the alphabet, A, B, C, until you come up with the name of the actor. You can take a breath, right? So I had to give really super endings. I doubled the ending. I gave one ending and then I gave a second ending. Right? So it's the kind of book that I would want to read.
Yes.
So that's the storyline, but I could tell you some other things that might be interesting.
Yeah, and I don't want to give too many spoilers away, because I will say this: as I read the book, I'm a pretty quick reader. However, I waited to start reading it during my summer break, and so I read a little bit every morning while I drank coffee, kind of waking up. And I couldn't wait. I would say, like, I couldn't wait to get back on my journey with Jonathan. And I would tell my husband, I'm like, oh, I just can't wait to see what happens next. And I had to like stop myself a lot of times from keeping reading because I wanted to make it last longer. And because I enjoyed it so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I enjoyed the historical parts of it. I mean, like you keep talking about how it's very difficult when you have a 21st century writer writing about something that happened in the 19th century. And I always have that problem when I'm trying to find an author that I like to read, especially when they're talking about a certain point of history. And a part of that, I think, has to deal with me being a history teacher and all that kind of stuff. But I really like it because it gives you the culture. Very rarely in a book can you find the culture of that time frame to build the story with. And that's a lot of problems I see with some writers who are trying to write in that genre. Like you said, there's genre fiction and then there's literary fiction. So putting the two together is very difficult. And it's one thing I enjoyed most about your work is because I was living that time period.
Yeah, I felt the same way.
I was seeing it through the eyes like the feel of sitting in that room, of knowing that the only heat wasn't a central heat and air that was blowing in the vents. It was, the only thing you got was the fireplace. If you wanted heat, you had to have something that was burning. Uh, and I don't think a lot of people, and I haven't seen it in your writing about, and most people don't write this, but the dimensions of the way houses were built had a lot to do with a lot of things in those time periods. That most of the houses, they were built with low ceilings because of the heating factor. So it's not like today when you're reading something that somebody's writing and they're writing it with these high ceilings and you're like, then the fireplace would have to be about a third of the way up the wall in order for you to get a little bit of heat. So, but the one thing I do like is you made Edgar a character and you even gave him the typical nickname of a friend. And I'm not going to give away anything other than that. So it made that he was a friend character. He was a personality. And so that leads me to ask, why did you even want to include or, make Edgar part of this story? What made you say, hey, I think I'm just going to write something that Edgar Allan Poe-ish.
Well, I enjoy 19th century writing, reading 19th century work. And I saw Edgar Allan Poe differently than most people. I saw a person who found it hard to fit into society.
Yeah.
There was Edgar Allan Poe, the genius, and then there was Edgar Allan Poe, the man.
Yeah.
And in my view, Edgar Allan Poe had trouble fitting in any portion of society.
Yes.
Whether he was at the military academy, whether he just couldn't fit in. It's not that he didn't want to.
Yeah.
He just couldn't do it. And there are people in the world then and in the world now, good people.
Yes.
That just find it hard to fit in. And so I wanted to give the reader another side of Poe, a more human side, where he's feeling, right? Where sometimes he's even a little anxious about what he's asking his friend to do, right? And he feels guilty. So, yes, I had to show him more human and more likable, I would say. Instead of distant and well, eerie and cold.
Right.
He was human. And there was this. The only time that I know that Poe actually fit in with anyone was Clemens.
Yeah.
Right? Virginia, your mother.
Yeah.
Felt at home. He felt comfortable. Everyone needs an anchor in life. Someone to keep them from flying away.
Yeah.
So, mentally, spiritually. And he found that anchor with Virginia Clem.
Yes.
But I think she passed on in 1847. Right? That's when he lost it. His anchor was gone. The only thing that anchored him. And I know this is a hard way to put it, but he was doomed after that.
Yeah.
And he started slipping away. And it took a couple of years, but eventually he gave up.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that the reader deserves to see another side of Poe. Poe that maybe they could identify with.
Yes.
And because Poe in this story also, although he's not the central character, he evolves also.
Yes.
I made sure that he evolved. And well, I can give the ending away, can I?
Well, I mean, it's totally up to you, but yeah, if you want to save that way people out there, that are going to watch and listen will, have that anticipation of, ooh, what are they talking about?
There's this. When I wrote the book, I didn't write it to have it published.
Right.
I wrote it for my wife,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just to say, hey, here's a book, like
Yeah.
I promised. My wife read it and she says, we have to have it published. And I said, no.
Oh, wow.
I said, no, I just wrote it for you, because this is how I think a 19th century book should be written
Mm-hmm.
in the 21st century. So she said, no, we have to have it published. And I said, publishers don't know me, right? It'll take forever. So
Yeah.
she said, well, let's self-publish.
Yeah.
And she talked me into it. I said, okay, we'll self-publish. So that's what we did. We self-published.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't enough. Right? So what she does, she says, we have to send it out to get it professionally reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We need professional reviews. So I said, well, uh, do we have any relatives? And that wouldn't work. She said, no, professionally. So what we did is we sent out to two organizations, international organizations of professional reviewers.
Mm-hmm.
And they both rated it 5 stars.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, well, one called it a work of literary genius. This is what one reviewer called it. And
Mm-hmm.
between you and me, I'm just me. All right. And I just wrote the book
Mm-hmm.
for the enjoyment of writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that wasn't enough for my wife. So, right, my wife is sitting over here on the side, right,
Yep.
like this.
Oh.
Giving you the look.
Yep.
Mhm.
All right. So then she tells me, well, we have to enter it into some contests.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, I said, you have millions of books out there, and hundreds and hundreds at any one time, entering these contests. So she talked me into it. I said, okay, I acquiesced. And I said, send them.
Mm-hmm.
So we entered 3 international contests.
Oh, that's great. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't bad. It came
That's
out
good.
it came out much better than I expected.
That's wonderful.
On one we took gold with the
Nice.
Literary Choice Award. Another we took first place in paranormal fiction.
Okay.
Oh,
And in another one, we took the 2023 Gold Award, and the book was named 2023 Book of the Year. So
yeah.
Congratulations on all of those. That is wonderful.
uh, it's all right, but thank you. It was a surprise.
Well, those are good surprises. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it can be daunting, I know, to, want to put your work out for someone else's review in itself. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, it's like, wow, I didn't realize this would be such, such an accolade for something you kind of just you didn't really mean for it, I guess, is the way it's coming
Mm-hmm.
across to me. You didn't mean for it to be a public venue. You were doing it for
Yeah.
one person and one person only.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So,
I was doing it just for something to do, to
Mm-hmm.
yep.
occupy my time, and because also I promised to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Now, now it seems I'm turning into a writer.
Okay.
Here I am in my dotage, and I'm turning into a writer. So it's something to do, and I like it.
Well,
That's wonderful.
good. Yeah, that's always the plus about, there's always the saying that if you can do something that you love to do
Mm-hmm.
and enjoy it to the point to where it's not really something that's
Work.
takes
Like,
yeah, thank you,
yeah.
takes work.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that leads me to ask the question, who did the cover? Because the artwork is phenomenal.
Yes.
Thank you. I did. I
Well,
Woohoo!
It is amazing.
Since we were self-published, we looked around for a book cover artist, and there were a lot of them out there. And I looked at their work, and I didn't like what I saw. I'm not saying that there aren't really good ones out there, but the ones that had free time, that we were able to devote some time to, my book.
Right.
It was too cartoonish.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, there are really a lot of good book cover artists out there. Couldn't find any. So I have some experience with Photoshop. So I told my wife, look, I'll design the cover. Because originally we just had the title of the book on there. Originally. Then we upgraded and I put a picture of Poe on there.
Okay.
That wasn't good enough either. And well, finally I said, look, let me just design the cover and we'll put it up and we'll see how that goes. So the cover of the book that you're reading now, I designed on using Photoshop.
Well, you did a beautiful job. It fits the essence of the book just wonderfully. I can't. I'm trying to think of all the different adjectives of what's going through my head.
Well, yeah, and I mean the colors themselves are so. I guess they speak their own language. Not just the pictures, but the colors, the whole ambiance of the cover is a story in itself.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that draws me to it. And it's like Poe is there, but like from one of the parts, and one of his famous words is, a dream within a dream, one of his one of his writings. And that's kind of what I get when I look at the vision on the front of the book. It's like it's a dream within a dream, but yet it fits so perfectly with the month of October, because that's one of my favorite months. It's the fall of the year, and the colors and the the whole ambiance, and then the person that's walking carrying the death of a salesman comes to mind from Arthur Miller, walking down, and he's walking on a cloud of paved road, and it's like I said, it tells a story in itself. And that's one of the things that it's very, very unique and wonderful to go along with the book. So,
yeah,
good job on that part.
I also think of, Jeannie, you said, it was the month of October, which is kind of part of a line out of Ullalune by Poe. And that's one of my favorite poems that he wrote. And it gives that feeling of that poem.
Yeah, there's just so much ambiance into the whole cover that it makes me just put it with the story on the inside, and it makes it that much more.
Yes.
One more thing, now that I thought of it. In chapter 4, there's a poem, and it was a poem that forms, in Poe's mind as he's falling asleep. Poe didn't write that poem. I wrote the poem.
Oh, okay.
So, because there are people that have read the book and they couldn't find that poem in any of Poe's work.
Yep.
And so I'll just clear that up now. I wrote that poem.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yes.
I mean, it fits so well that people we're trying to find it as part of Poe's work to know that it's your work. It just shows how much, you are integrating the wonderful world of Poe into the work itself. So that's great.
So when was your first introduction to Edgar Allan Poe?
Oh, I would say in school in the early 1950s.
Okay.
And we were going over some poetry, and The Raven came up. And the one thing about The Raven, that particular poem, it was written in octameter. And the problem with that is he ruined it for everyone else. And
yes.
any other anyone who writes poetry in octamina
Mm-hmm.
is hard pressed to not sound like Poe.
I agree. I totally agree.
You know, he captured the octamina and ruined it for everyone.
Yes. Oh, I know. Yeah. Most of my students have read The Raven before they get to me in ninth grade. And they're like, "Are we going to read it again?" And I'm like, "Well, we will use it for a writing essay, but we're not going to like read it." And they're like, "Oh," because they love it.
So,
The
since you self-published this book, James, and you've gotten such great accolades for it, do you have any other books on the horizon that you might be working on that may have a Poe influence or something else that we can look forward to?
Well, actually, I do. I
Woohoo!
have.
Yay.
Here I am, turning into a writer. Uh,
Uh-huh.
Before I tell you, I just want to say this before I forget.
Okay.
A book has got to be written for the reader, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
uh, I wrote the book, like I said before, it's a book that I would want to read. So I
Mm-hmm.
read it to the reader, at that time, me and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have in mind, and I started it, was it's a series of books.
Okay.
The world's most unusual detective.
Ooh.
I mean, he is the rarest detective you'll ever find
Mm-hmm.
in the world, living or dead. All
Oh,
right.
okay.
I'll just say that.
Okay.
Here's the thing. It'll be a series of books,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, each book will involve one particular case so that it's not open-ended. You read the book and the case is solved, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
in the next book, new case and a new resolution.
Okay.
Okay. So, because I don't want to, how can I explain this? I don't want to trap the reader into having to read a second book
Yes.
in order to resolve everything that was supposed to be resolved in the first book. I
That
can't do
makes
that. It's
that
not me.
makes sense. Yeah.
I don't begrudge anybody else doing it, but I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I I have uh I have very little ambition. I
Yeah.
I I enjoy writing now, but I
Mm-hmm.
have no illusions of grandeur, and I'm not grasping for anything.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's just something for me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now that readers out there would enjoy the work.
Nice.
Absolutely. Now, with the new series, is it going to take place in the 19th century as well?
Mhm. Uh,
If you don't want to give it away, it's okay.
let's put it this way. It'll take place in more than one century,
Okay.
Nice.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
It'll
Mm-hmm.
take place in more than one century.
Okay.
And it's I I can see it. You know, when Edgar Poe uh, when he wrote his stories, he would write the beginning and he
Mm-hmm.
would write the end. And
Mm-hmm.
then what he would do is connect the beginning with the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that was good. But what I do, what I did with the first novel, is I wrote the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
I let the book evolve, and I let the ending evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Otherwise, I would have had to try and make everything fit that ending.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have worked.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's got to be a flow not only to the sentences, but there has
Mm-hmm.
to be a flow to the story, and
Yes.
it has to flow from one chapter, flow right into the next chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the paragraphs, for example, are comprised of two sentences,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? And that's 19th century, where you have to flow. There's got to be a cadence, a rhythm to the sentences.
Mm-hmm.
And in the novels that I plan on writing, it's going to be like that also.
Okay, great.
It's going to be 19th century
Okay.
writing.
That progression, that's the one thing I love about the stories is they progress and they have to develop on their own and you have to let
Mhm.
them. And so the audience is progressing with the story and that makes it just double the fun, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And to me, if you do, I think every writer has a different process, and some processes can be with that strict outline of this is exactly what I want to happen. But again, I think that if you do that, you almost box yourself in and it may not feel right. And so I really like the way that you say how you do your writing, because you may have one expectation or anticipation of what may happen, and then something comes in your mind and your imagination to say, no, this is the way it really needs to go.
Right, right. Oh, my wife is signaling me, and what she wants me to do is mention this.
Okay.
Um, Before the novel is worked on, the one that's coming up,
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting together a book of poetry.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Now, uh, the poems are poesque,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're lengthy poems because I like to tell a story when I
Mm-hmm.
when I write a poem. And that I'm working on, and it should be out maybe just a few weeks, but it's a standalone book of
Okay.
poetry.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'll be anxious to see that.
Well, I can give you the title. It's Poems for a Dark, Stormy Night.
Okay. Love
And
it.
I'll probably self-publish.
Okay.
I'll I'll create the cover for it.
That will be,
Awesome. Can't
that will
wait.
be, yeah, go ahead, Jeannie.
I was just going to say that's awesome. I can't wait.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
So, do you have a favorite Poe story or poem?
All right, but before I tell you, I just have to preface it. Um, because Poe couldn't fit in anywhere. He was a virtual loner,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw him thinking of himself as the living dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he was prematurely buried by society, and there he was, trying to fit in everywhere. And I see many of the stories that he's written as him, as the central character. And he was placing himself in, well, in various scenarios as
Mm-hmm.
the central character. If it's the fall of the House of Usher, Roderick,
Mm-hmm.
uh, there he is.
Mm-hmm.
He hears everything. He knows everything that's going on in the house.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he addresses catalepsy.
Mm-hmm.
Roderick's sister down below.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, Poe was both those characters. Mask of the Red Death. It was Poe that was trying not to, well, not to come to terms with his own death,
Mm-hmm.
right? He was all right with everybody else's death, but not his own.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very natural for people to feel that way.
That's
You
true.
know,
Mm-hmm.
everyone can endure someone else's pain and suffering, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We can
Right.
all endure that. But when it comes to our own pain and suffering, that's different,
Yes.
right? So when I started to read Poe and seeing him as the central character, then it gave me a different understanding of Poe.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I it it made it as if Poe was saying, all right, here is a poem, here is a story, and let me tell you about myself and how I feel at times.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So when I started to read Poe's work that way, it changed. It changed everything.
Okay.
Right? It became different. It was Poe speaking to me,
Mm-hmm.
and me just reading one of Poe's stories. I just wanted to mention that, because
Yeah.
approach it. You approach Poe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sense.
And I was going to say, on our Poe Unplugged, which is we call it our Unbook Club. There's a group that reads, like anybody can join in and register and be a part of it, where we read a poem or one of his stories, and then we talk about it. And it's very interesting to see everyone's interpretation and how they see Poe writing, kind of like what you mentioned. Sometimes Poe seems like he is a character in the story. And, sometimes I think he's the unnamed narrator, which he uses, over and over again. And so one thing I know Jeanie always mentions this, and I'm surprised you didn't jump on that, Jeanie, is Poe leaves everything up to the reader's interpretation, which is so wonderful because your imagination can just go many different directions with how he wrote his pieces.
Yep.
I agree.
I mean, that's essential Poe, and that's what I've always said. It's essentially Poe is the perfect reader's writer.
Yes, that's a great way to say it. Yes.
Because he writes strictly for the reader and for the reader's emotions, their times of life, whatever. Because one thing I do always say, especially when we're in Poe Unplugged, is that no matter what point of time in your life, everything you read by Poe has a different type of meaning. Yeah. Whether you read him young and you see something different, but then you go through something tragic in your life and you reread something and it has a whole different meaning.
Yeah.
And that was the genius of Poe.
Absolutely.
I agree.
So thank you very much for sharing your book with us, James. It was very much an homage to the man and the humanity of who he was and who he could have been, and maybe who he is to each individual that loves Poe.
Yeah.
He's the friend. He's the friend that we always want.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. No, this has been wonderful speaking with you about you and your book and what's coming up next. Do you go to any events to promote your book or do book signings?
Well, actually, I have 2 events coming up. And I have
great.
to read them. I have one, it's a book festival, Deep Valley Book Festival in Mankato, Minnesota on October 5th. And then there's the Minnesota Craft Collectives Autumn Market in Albert Lea, Minnesota on November 9th and November 10th.
Okay, wonderful.
And basically that's it, for now.
Well, that's great. And so if you're viewers and listeners, if you're in the Minnesota area, you need to go check those out.
Thank you.
Yes. So again, yes, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this has been a very enjoyable afternoon with you.
Yes, and can't wait for your next series of That Detective, because I want to know what is going to be up with that.
Yes. Yeah. Huge detective fiction fans here.
Yep.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes.
Yep. We hopefully will speak again in the near future at some point, and maybe even catch you at a book signing or something down the road. You never know.
Yes.
That could happen.
Anything can happen.
That's right. That's right. Well, Jeanie, on that note,
we are Poe out.